Welcome to the GREENPOINT Williamsburg News Magazine. Neighborhoods Today. In this edition, join us as REENA Marie PELC interviews Councilman Ken Fisher regarding many of the concerns of the community. And I'm Dick Mahan. A part of being well-informed is knowing your elected officials. There are representatives, and we're elected to voice our concerns and needs. In an effort to introduce GREENPOINT and Williamsburg to our elected officials, REENA Marie will be speaking with some of them. It'll be an opportunity to show you who they are and to tell you what they're working on. In the studio today with REENA is Councilman Ken Fisher. REENA?
When the Council of the City of New York was restructuring and shifting district lines, the 33rd District was formed and Ken Fisher was reelected by over 73% margin. But he's not a stranger to Brooklyn. As a matter of fact, he's a native Brooklynite and maintains his office on Court Street in the Borough Hall section of Brooklyn. Well, Councilman Ken Fisher is with me in the studio today, and he's here to talk about his involvement with the Council of the City of New York and some major issues facing the GREENPOINT and Williamsburg communities. Councilman Fisher, thank you for joining us.
No, thank you for inviting me.
Welcome to Neighborhoods Today. First question, for those of us who might not quite understand what the Council is, exactly what is the Council and what's your role as Council member, part of the 33rd District?
Well, the Council is the legislature for the City of New York, and we basically have 5 functions. First of all, we pass the city budget, which is a substantial undertaking every year. That budget is $30 billion approximately for operating expenses, and also another $5 billion for capital programs like repairing our highways and building a new police station. The second thing we do is we pass on land use issues. That could be a zoning change, or it could be the siting of a city facility, decision whether you get a 30-story apartment building on your block or a homeless shelter. The third thing that we do is we pass local laws. For example, one of the laws that I was a sponsor of requires banks to provide additional security at ATMs or cash machines. That was an example of a local law. We also do community organizing. We'll go in and work with a neighborhood to try and deal with a problem that they might have. And lastly, we act as the citizens' ombudsman to city agencies. If there's a pothole or a traffic light that needs repair, we'll go to the city agency and ask them to expedite that work.
Okay, let's talk about some major issues now, and there really are a few major issues in this community. Incineration, a big issue, a big problem that just will not seem to go away. The GREENPOINT incinerator has not been closed. The city, it seems, still has not abandoned plans to construct a 44-story incinerator, a new incinerator at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. What's the story, and where do you stand on the issue?
Well, GREENPOINT and Williamsburg have been very badly treated by a succession of administrations on the issue of solid waste. As a result of some very poor planning, we not only have the dangerous and antiquated GREENPOINT incinerator and the plans for the Navy Yard incinerator, but some 51 transfer stations and recyclers that operate here. We've calculated more than half of the city's garbage passes through our neighborhood every day. And that's not likely to get any better the way this present administration has been trying to address the problem. When the city passed its solid waste management plan, they did agree to close the GREENPOINT incinerator, and that was good news. But there's a lot of buts. But they said it wouldn't happen for several years. They said it wouldn't happen if they didn't really need it. And we think that what they've done is tried to avoid coming to grips with how dangerous that plant really is. Controller Holtzman and other elected officials and I have called for the state to do tests on the GREENPOINT incinerator so we can find out exactly what's coming out of the stacks. That's never been done. And the city and the state have just refused to do it. So we think the decision to close the GREENPOINT incinerator, while it's the right decision to make, was made for the wrong reasons. It was made for the reasons of letting them avoid what was going on. Now, it's not just that the city hasn't abandoned its plans for the Navy Yard incinerator. The administration, despite the mayor's pledge when he was a candidate to have a moratorium on that program, has done everything possible to move it forward, attempting to circumvent clean air regulations, riding roughshod over some recent issues that have come up involving lead and so forth. And what's amazing about the notion of incineration is that during the hearings that we had at the council, I forced the Commissioner of Sanitation to admit that it's actually more expensive to burn the garbage and then get rid of the ash than if we just got rid of the garbage in the first place. So putting aside the environmental issues, which are paramount, the health concerns that we have, particularly for children, on a simple dollar and cents basis, it doesn't make any sense. The latest issue that's come up is that researchers have uncovered previously unknown maps of the Navy Yard area, which indicate that the very site that's picked for the incinerator may be the burial ground for up to 8,000 to 11,000 Revolutionary War soldiers who perished on British prison ships during the Revolutionary War. And we've stated, together with the other elected officials, have called for a full archaeological excavation there, because if it's in fact true that this is a hallowed ground, I don't see how that incinerator is ever going to get built.
This could be a possible out.
Yes, we also are very encouraged by the fact that the new Vice President, Al Gore, is on record in his book, as well as throughout his career, as being an active opponent of incineration. And in the final analysis, in addition to the state permits that are required, there are federal permits from the Corps of Engineers and the Environmental Protection Agency that will also be required for the Navy Yard incinerator. I've written to the governor and suggested that the state start to rethink its solid waste strategy in light of the change in administration in Washington, because it may be that when we get to the point where we need that capacity, that incinerator won't be built. In that case, the city's going to be in a lot of trouble.
Well, let me kick into another question. You yourself have led opposition to the city's solid waste management plan, and you've sponsored various pieces of legislation to increase public safety and the quality of life. In lieu of that, can you figure out how, for example, let's say a New York State environmental commissioner, and I'm talking about Thomas Jorling, could supposedly be considering a construction permit for the incineration?
I think that Jorling, either because he came to the conclusion that the incinerator was safe, or because he just couldn't come up with anything better, made the decision that he was going to allow these incinerators to be built, and is doing everything he can to facilitate it. And one of the problems that we have is that while you have an ostensibly independent hearing officer who is considering all of the technical issues, that hearing officer works for Jorling. And in the final analysis, if Jorling's already made up his mind, it doesn't matter what the technical record shows. Part of it may be that there's a lot of pressure politically on the governor from upstate areas that don't want their land taken for landfill. And so they say that it's environmentally preferable to burn the garbage than to bury it. We know, however, from our surveys that there are landfills around the country that would be willing to take New York City garbage tomorrow, despite all of what you read about in the newspapers. And it would be far cheaper to dispose of it that way. In fact, it's very interesting. Out in Arizona, we've been shipping our sludge, the sewage that the water's taken out of, and there's a demand for New York City sludge. The farmers are putting it on their land. It makes the land fertile in ways that it never was before. And they've actually written letters to the mayor complaining that they're not getting enough New York City sludge. And I think if you told that to the average citizen, they'd say, you're crazy, nobody wants it. It's, you know, it's New York, the garbage barge, the trains, all this stuff. It's simply not true. We could deal with our problem in that kind of a rational way while we give ourselves a chance to develop the recycling industries.
Well, that's another question that this kicks into. It seems that viable options just have not been pursued, especially when we're talking about recycling. So if you talk about having to pursue some kind of option and not having really pursued any kind of viable options, obviously people will thus turn around and say, well, this is the only option we have.
Well, you're absolutely right. And that's why the environmental community, working with those of us who were in opposition to the Navy Yard, came up with the strategy, recycle first. What some people are saying is, look, it may be that eventually we're going to have to burn garbage if it turns out that we're too optimistic about what we can recycle. But if we do that, then recycling will never get off the ground. Right. On the other hand, if we recycle first and it turns out that we're wrong, we'll have extended the life of the Fresh Kills landfill long enough that we can build the incinerator later on. I think the other issue that's paramount is the siting issue. Anyone who's familiar with GREENPOINT and Williamsburg knows that this is probably the worst place in the city of New York to build an incinerator. between the sewage treatment plant and the GREENPOINT incinerator, the underground oil spill, the lead contamination,
Garbage transfer sites.
the transfer stations, the Radiac, our depository for low-level radioactive waste, that there are so many environmental intrusions in this area that it's not a question of not in my backyard. It's not in my backyard when you've made my backyard into a junkyard. And I think that that's something that was not fully taken into account when the plant was originally scheduled to be built here.
Another major issue is the Greenpoint shelter. That has been a thorn in many community members' side. Originally, I believe there had been talk about 200 homeless people at the shelter. Ultimately, numbers swelled to over 1,200. I think the number might be down to approximately 500. Where do we stand with the shelter situation, and how is it that, or rather, where does the responsibility lie in terms of this kind of backdoor dumping?
Well, everybody has now come to realize that the New York City Human Resources Administration is probably the most ineptly run branch of the government. And unfortunately, it's not only one of the largest parts of the government, but it's also one of the most important because it deals with the quality of people's lives, children. The horror stories we've seen about mismanagement of child welfare agency, about people sleeping in offices, all these things are symptomatic of the mismanagement in that agency. The unfortunate part is that, as in so many different areas, GREENPOINT found out about it first, and the rest of the city didn't listen. When I came into office, I found that my predecessor, Abe Gurgis, had a written commitment from Barbara Sable, the Commissioner of HRA, giving a timetable for the downsizing and the reduction of the population of the GREENPOINT Hospital shelter. And I also found out that that commitment was a lie.
So what's the holdup?
The holdup is that because of Sable's inability to manage her agency, the city's plans to create smaller shelters, to create permanent housing, have been basically paralyzed for the last 3 years. And the result of that is that they have no place to put the people who are in the shelter who they agree should be taken out of there. And the worst part of it is that the GREENPOINT community has never said, no, we don't want anybody there. They've said that they're willing to take a small, manageable contingent. They've said that they'll build permanent housing, as GREC neighborhood women are already planning on doing. It's not that they're against the homeless. It's that long before the homeless were planned to go to the GREENPOINT Hospital shelter, the neighborhood organizations, people like Concerned Citizens of Wither Street, were planning on building a nursing home on that site, and they've been robbed of that opportunity. There's an equally valid social need to deal with that problem. But because of the city's lack of trust, because the city has attempted to ride roughshod over the community, they have been paralyzed in their efforts to deal with this problem on any type of a rational citywide basis. And unfortunately, until there's a change in leadership at HRA, I don't think it's going to get better. We've gone to the mayor directly on this issue.
And his response?
The mayor has been sympathetic. The mayor has agreed that the hospital shelter should be treated as one complex, and it should be treated like an armory. But when we turn around, we see them downsizing the other armories and not the GREENPOINT Hospital shelter. And I've expressed my anger. Victor Robles, the other elected officials, the borough president, Howie Golden, we've said directly to the mayor that this is unacceptable. And every opportunity we have, we push him on this issue. We've been down to City Hall, I don't know how many times, we're getting ready to do it. Just recently, we wrote to Cesar Perales, the Deputy Mayor for Human Services, and said, look, there's an opportunity here to move forward with the nursing home. You don't have to keep your entire promise to us today, but at least show us your good faith. Show us that you care about this community. We hope that we'll have some positive results on that, but unfortunately the track record from HRA has not been a good one.
Do you think the situation would be the same if this was a community which is predominantly white, affluent community? We have a large Hispanic population, we have a large Hasidic population, we have a large Polish immigrant population, so it seems to me as if we're talking about people who don't necessarily have the same kind of political pull.
I think that's a factor in some of the decisions over the years, but I don't think it's presently a factor there. And the reason I say that is that in another part of my district, in Brooklyn Heights, which is predominantly white and affluent, HRA has been up to exactly the same tricks. There they started putting HIV-positive people, most of them drug users, in a building called the St. George Hotel. Many people remember
Right.
the St. George
Yeah,
in
I
its
know the
days.
St. George.
At that time, the community, similar to GREENPOINT, said, look, we'll do our share. We'll work with you. The clergy got involved, the community leaders, I was involved. But in exchange, the city agreed that they would keep the number to 65. It's in the middle of a residential neighborhood. Well, lo and behold, what did we find out after some period of time? They had lied to us again. Instead of there being 65 drug addicts that the city had moved into this residential neighborhood, it was 150. And when they appeared to be surprised when the community was angered by it and couldn't understand why it is that the community felt betrayed. And that was a neighborhood that was with very different characteristics. I think that GREENPOINT and Williamsburg have suffered from some extent being manufacturing neighborhoods. These were areas where housing was built to accommodate factory workers along the waterfront over a period of 100 years, where current zoning wouldn't allow that. And what happened is that nobody stepped in then to say, gee, maybe it's not a good idea for people to live so close to where toxic chemicals are being stored or used. And they also took advantage of a political helplessness, because you had divided communities, different ethnic groups that didn't necessarily work together. What I found is that over the last 10 years, this community has become stronger and it's become organized, because people are willing to look at how problems impact not just their block, but on the whole neighborhood. Working through the community board, the same people who are concerned about the incinerator, GREENPOINT incinerator, are also concerned about the shelter. They're also concerned about the Navy Yard. They're concerned about the quality of life throughout the neighborhood. And for the very first time, the city administration isn't able to play one group off against another. So I think that's a real good sign.
Okay, great. On that positive note, stay right with me. We have to break for a public service announcement right now. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
I love New York. We love New York.
We've been stuck inside our homes
while our everyday heroes have been working overtime
For New York to reopen
and stay open.
We all need to do our part.
And show that we care.
Look, man.
I wear a mask to protect you.
You wear a mask to protect me.
Let's all wear a mask
to stop the spread of coronavirus
and save lives.
When we show up in the mask,
we're showing up for each other.
Show your love for New York.
Because New York loves you.
We're back with Councilman Ken Fisher. We're going to continue talking about issues, problems, and also positive projects, things that are going on in the community. The Newtown Creek, that's another major issue, problems with water. What's going on there?
Well, the Newtown Creek sewage treatment plant is the largest on the East Coast. It's actually one of two in my district. I also have the Red Hook plant, and even though it's called Red Hook, it's actually in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Newtown Creek is out of compliance with federal clean water standards. It's a filthy, disgusting place. The workers there try very hard, but it was obsolete the day that it was built and over capacity. The city is planning on spending hundreds of millions of dollars to bring it up to standards. We're concerned, however, that what their plan is really to expand the capacity of the plant so that it would treat even more raw sewage than it is handling today. We opposed their plans when it came before the City Council and felt that they had not adequately studied the environmental impact of what it is that they were proposing. But we were told that everything was under control. Well, lo and behold, just a few weeks after the council, over my objections, passed it, the Commissioner of Environmental Protection, Al Appleton, let it be known that there were flaws in the plans. And in fact, just as our neighborhood activists, concerned citizens of GREENPOINT and the other environmental activists in the area had been saying that this plant, if they built it the way they said they were going to, was going to have exactly the same problems that they're having at the plant in North River. So they've gone back to the drawing boards. And it's going to be years before we know what's going on. And it's going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, perhaps millions of dollars more to redesign the plant. Now, I think our feeling is we'd rather get it right the first time and not have to deal with this problem. But people are very skeptical about the city's willingness to really do the right thing, or their ability to do the right thing in this situation. I think eventually everybody agrees that the plant has to be upgraded. We're pumping raw sewage into the East River, and that's dangerous for everyone. At the same time, I think it's an indication that the priority that the city put was on the impact that the plant has on overall development and not what it means to the people who have to live with the smell. And this isn't just some abstract concept. One of the common measures for determining how a plant is operating is with hydrogen sulfide, H2S. It's the smell of rotting eggs that you sometimes get. The human nose can detect 3 parts per billion in the air. It is not uncommon, according to the city's own studies, for this plant to be giving off 1,000 parts per billion. So it's not imagination, it's not make-believe, it's a very real problem. And unfortunately, it's going to take some time before we know what the long-term health impact of the emissions from the plant have been on the people who live in that area.
Mm-hmm. Mayor Dinkins has also said that he would like to see all the boroughs pursue and develop their waterfront property. That goes just as equally for this community, and in this community it seems as if that has opened up somewhat of a Pandora's box. We have Community Board 1, which has been spearheading plans to develop that waterfront property in this area. In particular, I believe it's the Greenpoint Terminal Market area and around Kent Avenue. Yet at the same time, there have been numerous community groups which have contended that they have been locked out in terms of residents, community residents. They've been locked out of the decision-making process and basically have been pushed aside. What's your opinion on the situation?
I think that there have been no decisions made, and so I don't think that anybody's been locked out of the process. The community board has undertaken a study of what the potential for the waterfront can be, and I've attended numerous public meetings on that process. Some of it is a matter of aesthetics, style. A lot of it is a question of who ultimately is going to make the decision. But we're a long way from that. The fact that you have some sense of vision as to where to take a neighborhood doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to happen. But I think that we also have to keep in mind that while the community is trying to decide what it would like to happen to its waterfront, decisions are being made for it. People who have property along there are converting that property into transfer stations where garbage is being handled. There are other undesirable uses, and the opportunity is being missed for reasonable and appropriate development. I'm not sure that there's any one vision of the waterfront. We don't want to jeopardize the industrial jobs that we have there. People need to be able to work. At the same token, there are advantages in the proximity to Manhattan, the views, the access to mass transit. Those have real economic value. Most importantly, people need a sense that they're not going to be displaced from their neighborhoods. The waterfront should be a resource available. There should be public access. And we have a desperate need for recreational activities in this area. So I think that there's a certain benefit to the tension that between groups that have been traditionally involved from that planning effort and some new people who are getting involved with it, but we're a long way away from having any kind of final decisions. And I think one of the problems has been that if somebody comes forward and says, let's talk about whether there should be housing on the waterfront, people immediately panic, and they're concerned that that means the bulldozers are going to come tomorrow and the real estate brokers are going to be jacking up prices the day after that. We're a long, long way away from that. Now, the city itself has come out with a comprehensive waterfront strategy, and it recognizes the diversity of the Greenpoint Williamsburg waterfront. We're going to be starting public hearings at the community board level, at the city planning commission level, and ultimately at the council, but it's going to take a long time before we come to closure on those issues.
You mentioned recreation. That's something I just quickly would like you to talk about. McCarran Park has been undergoing a facelift. There's talk about reconstruction along Manhattan Avenue. That might be repaving the streets. That might be new sewer lines. What's going on that front?
Well, we've had some good progress in the last couple of years, even though the budget situation is very bad, and we expect it's going to continue to be bad for the foreseeable future, in winning some capital improvements for this area. We expect to see improvements in McGoldrick Park. We expect to see improvements in McCarran Park. And I'm hoping that we'll move forward with the reconstruction of Manhattan Avenue soon. McCarran Park is a very complicated public policy issue because of the competing interests of various people who have expressed a concern there, the historic preservation, as well as the need for recreational space. What was happening, though, was that the physical structure of the bathhouse, which is of some architectural note, was deteriorating rapidly. And we were able to work with the Landmarks Conservancy and with the community board to secure the funding so that the roof could be repaired, so that we could then decide what an appropriate use would be without having it crumble around us. Unfortunately, the complete reconstruction of the pool and the pool house would cost in excess of $16 million. And I think that the community lost out on the opportunity before I was elected to have that project move forward. So now we have to start the painful process of once again coming to consensus on what it is that people would find useful there, knowing that we've at least secured the physical structure, and then we can begin to lobby the city to put those kind of dollars in.
Sounds great. Time flies when you're having fun. Literally, we're out of time here. What I want to do before I say goodbye to you, though, is if any of you out there, if you have a problem in the community, if you feel there's an issue you believe is not being addressed, feel free to contact Councilman Fisher's office at 718-875-5200. We're out of time. Thank you so much for stopping by Neighborhoods today. Promise me that you'll stop by again.
You've got it. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you.
The textbook says politicians lead. No, sometimes the people lead, and the politicians follow. Follow the American people. They will do the right thing. There is still a right thing. Maybe right thing is a New York expression.
That's it for this edition. For Neighborhoods Today, I'm Dick Mahan. Thank you for watching.